Hello, Wales. We are. You can't make me laugh. Sorry, I've got everyone watching me today when I record the story, so they're going to try and keep straight faces for me. So we've got our fourth chapter in the Royal Rabbits of London, The Great Diamond Chase. Chapter 4. Shiloh, Laser, and Clooney climbed into the a little underground railway cart which sped them back to the Grand Borough along tunnels deep under the streets of London. As they rattled along the tracks, Laser and Clooney were quiet, alarmed that Russian minks were loose in their beloved, peaceful London. Shiloh's tummy was rumbling now, and although he tried hard to focus on the minks and the missing diamond, he couldn't stop himself wondering what was for supper. And then, let me show you there. I'll show everybody else as well. It's laid out in quite a different way, a bit like a fact sheet. So it says, how do you spot a mink of the Kremlin? Minks of the Kremlin are a secret service of killers who live in luxury beneath the Grand Kremlin Palace and have worked for the rulers of Russia for 1,000 years. If the rulers of Russia don't like someone, these minks pay them a visit. Minks are cousins of weasels. They have long, silky bodies, short legs, small heads, tiny ears, and snub noses. They are very quick and have sharp little teeth. Minks of the Kremlin are mostly covered in rich brown fur, which is so deliciously soft that sometimes you might even forget about their teeth. They can be black or, very occasionally, white. Minks of the Kremlin have white patches above their top lips that look like they have little white moustaches. Minks of the Kremlin are experts in all the martial arts and always wear white judo pajamas. Minks of the Kremlin are very cunning and clever and can be vicious, which is why they make perfect assassins. The greatest enemy of the mink is the fox. Minks are very nervous of foxes. Minks of the Kremlin speak Russian. They say niet for no and da for yes. Minks of the Kremlin eat fish eggs and meat, but they'll tuck into just about anything as long as it's not past its sell-by date. They are incredibly fussy about sell-by dates. Minks of the Kremlin are very clean and like to wash themselves a lot. They love water. And now a special operations group of minks was in London. At dawn the following day, Nelson and the Hopsters gathered in the war room, looking at a map of the Russian embassy in Kensington Palace Gardens, which is also known as Millionaires' Row because so many rich people live there. How many minks? Nelson asked. At least 10, Laser replied. 10 minks are no match for my thumpers, boomed Zeno, flexing his big muscles. 10 minks are enough to secure the diamond and guard it on its way out of London, Clooney added. Just then Shiloh's tummy groaned so loudly that they all turned and looked at him in surprise. Haven't you had breakfast? Asked Nelson. I don't think it's a hunger growl, said Shiloh. It's a niggle. A niggle? Nelson repeated. Yes, a niggle. It's a feeling that something's not right. Aha, an intuitive niggle, murmured Nelson, standing at once. A sense of foreboding. He's talking rubbish, boomed Zeno impatiently, turning back to the map. Otherwise he would have got a niggle the day the diamond was stolen. Shiloh's ears flopped over his face, and he lowered his eyes regretfully. Niggles don't always come when you want them to, he murmured in a quiet voice. We've no time to listen to your niggles, exclaimed Zeno. Not so fast, Nelson murmured, raising a shaky paw. Go on, Shiloh. Shiloh managed to lift one ear, but the other remained drooped over his eye patch, because everyone in the room was now looking at him, which made him rather self-conscious. I just keep thinking that it seems obvious that the Russians want the Siberian diamond enough to steal it. But is it too obvious? He began. I think my nigger is telling me that there's something else going on. Shiloh took a breath, shrinking slightly beneath the weight of so many eyes. What if the person who really stole the diamond wants us to think it's the Russians, but it isn't them at all? Shiloh is right, murmured Beldapore. It could be a very clever plot to fool us into chasing the wrong creatures. Clooney stroked his whiskers. I'm not so sure, he said. If it's not the Russians, who else could it be? STBT told us that Britain and Russia are friends now, so maybe someone wants to ruin that, Shiloh murmured, trying to sound confident, when inside he felt small and foolish. The only creatures who'd want to create that sort of mayhem are the Ratsies, and they're not clever enough to sneak into Buckingham Palace and steal the diamond, argued Laser. I agree, said Clooney, but the minks are clever enough to get through the defences. Which is why it must be the Russians who stole the diamond, Zeno boomed. And we need to find out where they are and send in the thumpers to get it back. We have no time to lose. Shiloh could see that only Beldapore believed him, and he began to doubt himself. What if he was wrong after all? Perhaps he wanted to get the diamond back too badly, because the robbery was all his fault, and he felt so guilty about it. The little bunkin was about to give up, when he felt another unmistakable niggle in his tummy. He remembered his old friend, the one who had told him that he was braver than he knew, the one who had believed in him from the very beginning. Horatio once told me, he began, feeling a stab of longing in his heart. At the mention of that name, everyone stared at Shiloh. Horatio was Nelson's brother, and a veteran royal rabbit who had nearly been killed by the corgis, but had miraculously escaped and vanished into the countryside to live in hiding. His bravery commanded respect. When Shiloh was living in the warren with his mother and siblings, he had become friends with Horatio, and it was the elder rabbit who had sent Shiloh to find the royal rabbits when the Queen had been in danger. Horatio once told me, Shiloh repeated. At that moment the big doors opened, and a gruff voice interrupted. Always listen to a niggle, it said. The eyes fixed on Shiloh switched suddenly to the large buck now hopping stiffly into the room. He was huge, with coarse grey fur and a long scar down one side of his face. His left ear had almost entirely been bitten off, and he was missing a hind paw. He leaned heavily on a walking stick. He looked as if he had once been in a terrible fight and had only just survived. The hopsters stared at the buck in bewilderment. Where was Frisbee, the major domo? She always announced visitors with 3 knocks on the big doors. How had this stranger got past security and into the Grand Burrow? He looked vaguely familiar, but who was he? However, Nelson knew, and so did Shiloh. Horatio! Cried the little bunny, so excited to see his old friend again that he forgot he was a royal rabbit, and bounded over and threw his arm around the buck's waist. Brother! Murmured Nelson in surprise. Horatio laughed at Shiloh's grip as Shiloh's grip tightened round him. Yes, one must always listen to a niggle, he said, patting the tender bunkin tenderly. Laser, Clooney and Zeno looked at one another in amazement. They had heard about the Generalissimo's brother Horatio, the only rabbit to survive the kennel, but never imagined he'd come back to the Grand Burrow. Nelson hopped over to his brother and embraced him. Shiloh released Horatio and watched with large shiny eyes as the two siblings were reunited after many years apart. "How marvellous to see you, brother. I hoped you'd respond to my letter and come back, but the weeks went by and I heard nothing from you," gravelled Nelson, patting Horatio's back a little too hard in order to hide his emotion. I'm glad you finally decided to return to the Grand Burrow. The Royal Rabbits need you. Times have never been more dangerous. And there is a picture of Horatio. The other rabbits queued up to shake his paw, but the gruff Horatio would have none of this. "Enough! I didn't come back to shake paws. I came back because—" But he was interrupted. "Forgive my rudeness, but I'm the Marshal of the Thumpers," bellowed Zeno, "and I'd like to know how you got past security and into the Grand Burrow." "I know the old craft of the Secret Service," replied Horatio in a small, deliberate voice. "I'm an ancient rabbit from the old world. I know tunnels beneath the palace that you youngsters have never heard of. But let's not waste time. I came back because I read about the stolen diamond in the newspapers and thought you might need help." "Go on," said Nelson, as the other rabbits listened attentively. "Many years ago, when I was working for the SRS, the Secret Rabbit Service, I assigned a covert mission and travelled to Russia. I spent enough time there to learn their language and their ways. No one knows more about Russia and its people than me. No one knows more about the minks of the Kremlin than me either. No one has ever got as close. So I decided it was time to come back." He settled his wise old eyes on Shiloh and smiled affectionately. "This little bunkin taught me a valuable lesson about bravery. I never thought I'd return to the Grand Burrow. After being caught by the pack and nearly eaten in the kennel, I didn't think I'd find the courage." He lifted his paw, which was wrapped in a bandage, and slowly unwound the fabric. The rabbits watched in fascination, wondering what he was going to reveal. At last, the bandage fell away, and there, in bright scarlet, was the badge of the Royal Rabbits of London, which he had concealed during his years in hiding. He was hiding no more. "Thanks to Shiloh," he said, "I found my courage, and here I am at your service." "And we're happy to have you," murmured Nelson. "You have arrived when you're most needed. Perhaps you felt a niggle too." "Well, I suppose I had a niggle of sorts. You see, when I learned that the diamond had been stolen, my thoughts immediately turned to the Russians." "As did ours," agreed Zeno triumphantly. He always liked to be right. "My thoughts also turned to the most fearsome mink in the whole of Russia. I believe I am the only royal rabbit to have ever met him." The royal rabbits glanced at each other uneasily. "Who is he?" Nelson asked. Horatio looked at them in turn. He lifted his chin and said in a deep, gravelly voice, "Minsky the Terrible." Shiloh's fur stood on end. The name sounded terrible. "Now, what time is it?" Horatio asked. Nelson looked at the clock. 7:30 a.m. "Perfect. Get me to Kensington Gardens at once," said Horatio. "If I'm right, I know just where to find those minks. And if Minsky the Terrible is with them, I'm the only one who can identify him." So that's the end of our chapter for today. I will see you tomorrow for chapter 5. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.